Hi everyone, this is Mindy and welcome back to another video for Tailored Expressions. Today I'm going to be using the Mini Slim Thin Frames die in two ways. First, I'll be using it to create a background for my card, and in another, I'll be using it to frame my background in a card. First, we'll take a look at the supplies I'll be using today. I'll have the Tickled Pink Stamp and Stencil combo, the Mini Slim Tropical Leaves Stencil, Toucan Do It Stamp and Stencil combo, the Mini Slim Thin Frames, some white embossing powder, foam squares, scotch tape, tweezers, and my embellishment wand. For cardstock, I have confetti cake, saltwater taffy, blue raspberry, white, pineapple, watermelon, Oreo, and gold foil. Inks is fruit punch, pineapple, candy corn, Earl Grey, poppy seed, Oreo, sugar cube, and pink champagne. And I'll also be using iridescent drip drops, Barely Art glue, and my blending brushes. I'm going to start by creating the components for my card. So here I already have the images stamped and die cut out, and I am placing them back into that negative space and holding those in place with Post-it tape. Then I'm going to bring in the stencils for each one of these, starting with Tickled Pink. I lined up the body of the stencil and I'm holding those down with my magnets on the Make Art station. And I'm starting off by blending fruit punch with my blending brushes. These are really nice large areas, and you could also Copic color them or watercolor them, but I'm finding that blending colors on is really the quickest and easiest way. Once I have fruit punch done, I'm just going to shift the stencil over, layer up the second portion of the stencil, which is the wing, and I'm going to do a pink champagne. So I'm going to add a light color to this. Once again, just picking the ink up with my blending brush and applying that ink over the wing. Once that color is all blended on, I'm going to remove the stencil, flip this over, remove the Post-it tape, and then set my image off on the side, and I'm going to bring in my toucan and add color to that really quick. For that toucan, I'm going to repeat the same steps. I had already stamped this out and die cut it and just put that positive piece back into my negative piece and held it on the back with some low tack tape. And then I'm lining up the first layer of the stencil, which is the body of the toucan, inked that up with poppy seed ink. Then I'm shifting this over, and this is going to be the wing and the tail. Now this is really cool because you could mask off one of these and do a variety of colors in the tail. I think would be really cool, but I decided to just keep this really plain and simple, and I am going to do a light gray. So this is Earl Grey ink, and I'm just going to add that color right over the tail and the wing. Then once the ink is on there, I'll remove that Post-it tape from the back, and I need to add a little bit more color to both of these birds. So I am going to take my Copic markers to add that color. So for the beak, I just have some warm grays that I added for the very tip, and then the remaining portion of the beak, I have two different shades of yellow in the Copic markers. I'm also doing the legs, so I added my lightest color first and then just a really thin line of that dark color. You could even skip that dark color for any shading because the legs are so thin. And then I'm going to color in the beak of the toucan, and I'm just using a variety of oranges for this. Now, previously, I had showed you a second flamingo, and that was one I had done off screen beforehand because I noticed my second one, I die cut wrong, or I die cut it really off, but I'm using both of them because I put a lot of work into that flamingo, so I am going to use both of those on a card. Now I'm just finishing up my coloring here really quick, adding some greens for those leaves and then brown for the branches. I added my lightest color first, and then I'm taking a darker marker and just adding a line on the bottom of that branch. And I'm going to finish off the toucan by just taking a really light blue and adding just a smidge of color right on the other side of that wing. Now I'm going to take that Mini Slim Thin Frames die, and I'm going to die cut it from my colors of cardstock. So that's the saltwater taffy, confetti cake, blue raspberry, pineapple, watermelon. I also did the gold foil as well too, and candy corn. I missed that in the beginning. So I have all of these out. Now you can notice around my mat, I have a ton of pieces. So you can make a ton of different cards, color combinations. I kind of fell in love with this when I lined it up. I just took various sizes from each pile, and I'm lining them up on a piece of cardstock here. Now this is actually a little bit bigger than a 3x6. I think this ended up being like 3¼ maybe by 6¼ I wanted to have a white edge around all of my frames. So I'm just taking that Barely Art glue, which is really great for adhering these thin frames because it has a really thin precision tip. And I'm just lining those up, and I'm not going to cover the entire back. I'm going to leave a white opening, mainly because as I was gluing these, my frames were starting to get distorted a little bit. You can see that the inside is curving in a little bit. So I stopped. I finished off with one more color here, a darker blue or my medium blue, and I'm going to glue that down, and I'm going to stop right there. Now off screen, I did go ahead and heat emboss a sentiment. I had stamped it in sugar cube ink onto Oreo cardstock and heat embossed it with white embossing powder, and then just trim that down to a thin strip. That black cardstock is going to stand out really well against this background. So I adhered the toucan down with a tape runner, and I added foam squares behind my sentiment to pop that up a little bit. Then I'm going to take some iridescent drip drops, and I'm going to add an odd number of them, 2 on top, 3 on the bottom, and I'm going to attach these with my embellishment wand and the Barely Art glue, and I'm going to secure those down. And then I'm going to trim off any excess that is overhanging on the edge of the card, and that will finish up this first card. So I used the frames in this one to actually create this colorful background. Now for my second card, I am going to create a colorful background with my inks and a stencil, and I'm going to use those thin frames to kind of highlight the background. So I'm starting off with a piece of sugar cube cardstock, and I'm just quickly and lightly ink blending on some color. This happens to be fruit punch, and then I'm going to bring in candy corn and pineapple, and I thought these colors were really nice and bright, just something really tropical to go with my flamingos. So I'm going to add those on, kind of overlapping a little bit. You can see it's pretty splotchy. I'm not being real particular on my blending because most of it is going to get covered up. I just didn't want to have a really stark white background with my stencil, so that's why I'm applying this color really light-handed and just kind of actually being a little sloppy about it. So then I'm going to take this background over to my Make Art station, and I'm going to secure down the Tropical Leaves Slimline Stencil, and I'm going to hold that in place with my magnets. And then I'm going to apply those same 3 colors. Now on some of the yellow, I'm going to add a little bit of that candy corn, and just wherever I can really emphasize those colors. So if you ever have a blended background that you're not happy with, find a stencil and add that on top. You'd be surprised at how much of that background really does get covered up with a stencil. Now here are 2 frames that I die cut from that gold foil cardstock using the Mini Slim Thin Frames die, and these are 2 different sizes, so it's going to leave quite a bit of a gap. And I'm going to attach those once again using that Barely Art glue because it has a great precision tip on it, and using my tweezers to help align those. So I'm just putting them on my cardstock as straight as I can, and this is kind of framing everything to draw your attention into the images and the sentiment. So here I have my 2 flamingos. One is die cut perfectly, the other one is not, but like I said, I'm still using it because I put a lot of work into it. So I'm attaching that first one down off on the side of the card with a tape runner. My second one, which is die cut really well, I'm attaching with foam squares to kind of pop it up for a little bit of dimension. And then I'm going to take my scissors and just trim off any of that excess that is overhanging. Now once again off screen, I did go ahead and heat emboss a sentiment onto Oreo cardstock. I like to stamp my sentiments in sugar cube and then sprinkle on white embossing powder. It just really helps fill in any gaps, and then it just really, that black cardstock really pops against this colorful background. Then once again, I'm going to finish off my card with those iridescent drip drops, attaching them with my Barely Art glue and my embellishment wand. So there we have 2 different ways that you can use these Mini Slim Thin Frames dies. One to frame your background and one to create your background. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you again real soon.